Okay, can you hear me? You should find your seats. I believe it's time for us to start. Warmly welcome, everyone. Good morning to you for this first part of session 7 of the Arctic Frontiers 2025. My name is Urban Råkberg. I'm Professor of Northern Studies at the Arctic University of Norway, which has its main campus here in Tromsø. So we are very happy to have many speakers today, and I will not say very much more than that we have a program here called Banner, that is involved in organizing quite a bit of this. But it is also limited to the committee that made the choices of people invited to these sessions. We have also a large poster session, and we are happy with the large interest we think we had for this session. So this is why it will go in 3 parts. First, now we have one for 1.5 hours, and then followed by another one. And tomorrow morning there will be the final 3rd part of this. So it will be a rapid movement. We will try to make room for questions at the end, but we will take 1 or maybe 2 after the short presentations. But I'm very happy, first of all, to invite for a little bit longer address Professor Heather Nichols from Trent University, Canada, who will now also present together with her colleague. Is that so? Please.
Okay, good morning and thank you. Urban, so it's 9:57, 56, 55. Okay, so that gives me, what time do you want me to stop? I'll just write it down. Okay. Oh, no, because it's 9, we're doing 20, right? Well, okay, we'll worry about that. Nick will keep time for me. So thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. And my colleague, Nick Gillespie, who's at the School for the Study of Canada, the Frost Centre for Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies, and is doing his PhD, is going to help me out today with the presentation. And what I chose to talk about today is, it doesn't fall under the geopolitical, perhaps as clearly as you might think, but when, as Urban said, we created these sessions, and we're with students from the Banner Project, and this was really the topic that the Banner Project was aiming to discuss. So I thought I would start just by talking about what the Banner Project is and how what it has to do with this topic today. So the paper Charting New Frontiers and Research on Cross-Border Indigenous, Sub-State and Non-State Actors is a bit ambitious, but really we're discussing the Banner Project. And the Banner Project, whoops, I hope you can hear me. The Banner Project is an international experiential learning project, and it's informed by using a broad regional context. We argue that the broad regional context is really foundational to the study of geopolitical patterns and changing times within the circumpolar north. And not only do we use a broad sort of regional perspective, and I'm going to break that down in a bit, but we also come at this from a borderlands perspective. And a borderlands perspective is really the idea that the circumpolar region itself is a borderlands. The circumpolar region is not just states, but it's indigenous peoples and nations and cultures. And I think you'd be really hard pressed to go anywhere within the circumpolar region itself where you didn't discover that there were overlapping layers of sovereignty and nationality and culture and language that blend and cross borders and feed into each other. So we think that's really, really important. But the question is, how does this borderless world work and intersect in times of change? How do you go from the global to the regional to the local? How can you understand those patterns? And then most importantly for us, how do you teach that? And so the Banner project itself works off this model, as I said, of here's the AMAP circumpolar world model that we're all very familiar with. But how do you teach that? And what questions should we be posing? What should we be thinking about? How do we study the multiscalar interactions between local, regional, and global processes? How do we understand the dimensions of change in multidimensional ways? And how do we identify new challenges and security issues? So in this talk, I think we'll try and explain a little bit about what we do and how we're doing it. So first of all, we're using the fieldwork method, and as you can see here, what we're doing is basically bringing students to the to different circumpolar sites, to different circumpolar places, and trying to pitch our understanding of that world in terms of how do you relate the global context in which you are situated in the local the global context within the local context in which you're situated. And that's not easy to do. And we've certainly we're traveling through many countries in the Nordic and North American North, and we are looking at different ways in different, going to different areas of fieldwork and trying to understand different ways in which we can approach and study. And that, I'll come back again to that in a minute. The next thing that we need to think about, though, is in a sense, why fieldwork? And I think we have to understand that fieldwork is pedagogy. We're bringing local context to broader issues, and we're importantly for this particular audience, and our students are in the room that are traveling with Banner. One of the things, the way that we're using, one of the innovative pedagogies we use is not just the fieldwork experience, but fieldwork and site visits in context of conference culture. Because conference culture, bringing students to conferences, this particular conference, we've been to Arctic Circle, we're going to be going to Arctic Frontiers. This particular context allows students to take what they've learned in local ways from their on-site visits, which they do in context of, we were in Akureyri before we went to Reykjavik to Arctic Circle. We are going to Arctic Encounters in Alaska, and we'll be traveling around looking at specific sites. We've been there before, but we're going to compare that up with the sort of conference culture. So it allows students really to get a take on the local and then immediately go and see how the academic and the policymaking community is talking about these issues. The other thing I want to say is for Banner, for the framing. It's not just the pedagogy, but how we frame these things. Framing is important, so we have to think about case studies. And this is something I'm going to come back to. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what some of our case studies are about, and then really why it's important to do these case studies in comparative context, because you can't understand everything just by going to one particular place. We're interested in plurality in the Arctic, and we need to understand different areas of the circumpolar region, and that's why we focused on North America and Nordic, and with a particular emphasis on Iceland, Norway, and Alaska. Because in each area, the kinds of issues, you get a totally different take. Similar issues maybe, but a totally different understanding. There's certainly a geographical specificity. So I'm just going to skip over a few things because I'm mindful of time. Here we are. Oh yes, our theme works, our themes. So our themes and locations. So we're talking about geographical specificity. A few of the things that we've focused on, we're looking at tourism in Alaska and Norway and Iceland. That's a very specific theme. And we're looking with particular emphasis on how communities experience and are shaped by tourism encounters. And really, as I'll talk about in a minute, it really does matter where you go. The experience of tourism in Reykjavik is quite different than the experience of tourism in Whittier, Alaska, or in Akureyri, Iceland, right? So we're focusing on tourism. We're focusing on transportation infrastructure, particularly we've looked in Iceland and Alaska, and students may remember that long drive from Akureyri to Reykjavik. That's a focus on transportation infrastructure. You now have a sense of what that, sort of crossing crossing the country network looks like. And the same thing in Alaska when we drove around Alaska, and when you drove, the students drove from Yukon through to Anchorage, you got a real sense of what infrastructure was. And again, when you study those things within your research study groups, and you come to conferences like this and understand people talking about shipping and infrastructure, that's part of the thematics that you're looking at. We've talked about urbanization in Iceland and Alaska, and again, looking at urban and remote communities. And of course, there's a big difference between looking at Reykjavik and Akureyri, and there's a huge difference between going to Seward and Anchorage. And so it's these, again, site specifics that are really, really important. And also one of the things that we've touched on is blue economies, and that was particularly true in Iceland and in Alaska. And that was combined with, particularly in Iceland, combined with some discussions and talking to the private sector. And we've also gone and visited sites in Alaska where we see port structure, and we begin to get a better understanding of that. So that's the sort of things that we're doing. And I would just like to talk a little bit about what we found, I would say, so far. I think we could sum up saying that in each of the field settings, the students, in each of the field settings, students explored from the community perspective. They talked to people. They did comparative observations. In some cases, they went out, when we were in Whittier, Alaska, they went out and interviewed some local people. One of our students talked to the mayor and began to put together the pieces of what it meant to live in Whittier and how people experienced tourism and how people experienced life in that community. And I think it's fair to say that in all of these experiences, excuse me, we found really comparable differences. And I think the fact that we are using a comparative perspective has made a huge difference. I think it equips our students to walk into a place, and now this is a new place in Tromsø, walk in and better understand what's going on. So again, what I want to maybe just skip ahead to talk about now is, because I am mindful of time, is we spent most of our time, or much of our time in the last little while in the Nordic country. And our next stop after this conference, so students are using this conference as part of the conference culture and the fieldwork experience. Our next stop in April will be in North America. We'll be going to Anchorage. And you might ask, well, why North America? And don't we have everything now? We've looked at some of the issues we've talked about: tourism, blue economies, urbanization, infrastructure. Well, I think that the thing is that one of the things that we have found and will continue to find in North America is there are two distinct themes that we really haven't looked at in depth. And one is, of course, Indigenous relationships. In North America, Indigenous relationships are so I would say they're quite different situations than in the Nordic countries. And the other thing we want to look at is security relationships. Again, and as my colleague Nick will explain, there's some really interesting and fascinating sort of case studies that you can look at in North America. So one of the things I want to mention about our Alaska encounter coming up is that we're really going to look at this cross-border relationship amongst Indigenous people, and it's not just national borders or international borders. There, borders of community, borders of land claim, corporate borders in Alaska, that really define the way in which Indigenous peoples are relate to land and Indigenous rights and funding. And this is something that we're going to look at in the Alaskan context. And there are many ways to do that, not just talking to community, but there are sites to visit, the Alaska Heritage Foundation. There's a community there that we'll talk to. And there are Indigenous-led, one of the particular places Indigenous-led science lab, which does research and speaks to issues of that local communities would like investigated. So there's so many ways that we can do that. And I think that specificity is really important to then come back to both a larger conference culture and think about our experiences in talking to Indigenous peoples in Nordic countries. And of course, we have Indigenous peoples in our amongst our banner students. So they're always there to both help give insights and to connect and also to learn. So I think that what I want to just say is the other thing that we can learn in North America is to take the big issue of cross-border connectivity. And Pikiala-Sorsarak is an example of an area in North America between Canada and Greenland where there's a Palenya, right? An area that in Inuit have been using for years and crossing over. And there's been a tremendous mobility both across the Canadian-Alaska borderlands and across the Greenlandic-Canadian borderlands. A tremendous amount of mobility to the point now where the Canadian and Greenlandic government are looking at having Inuit through the Pikiala-Sorsarak, if I said it right, commission to co-manage Inuit and national governments to co-manage that mobility and managing that area. Well, that's an important global issue that we can understand, co-management and self-governments and self-determination and sovereignty, that then we will try to pick up and understand more specifically how that plays out in our context in Alaska. I think that the last, I'm going to skip because we are short on time, and there's two of us, and I want to leave time for my colleague. So I think that the last thing I want to say is that we're looking at case studies. And one of the case studies that's quite new and interesting is what Nick Gillespie is going to talk about, is how to think about security. How do you teach security? And how do you teach new security relationships? Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you're going to give us some ideas.
All right, well, great. Thanks, Dr. Nickel. And I want to use the Yukon balloon incident in February 2023 as a North American case study and apply some lessons learned. So for context, in February 2023, 4 objects were detected, tracked, and ultimately shot down in North America. The first one, a surveillance balloon, was traced back to a People's Republic of China surveillance program, and it transited 6,600 kilometers over Canada and the United States. And it created public hysteria with its route flying over population centers and sensitive military installation sites. The balloon, the size of 2 school buses, led to speculation and ideas about its origins, its intentions and capabilities, and why it was not defeated sooner. It was the first time that the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, the binational defense command responsible for the airspace warning, airspace control, and maritime warning of the continental United States and Canada, had shot down an object over North America. And these public reactions and statements happened even though it was consistently stated by the highest levels of American political and military leadership that the balloon's capabilities were being assessed and did not pose an imminent risk to civilian or national security. So with that context, I want to turn over to the third object of that month, which was detected over the Yukon in northwestern Canada. And this balloon, by all accounts, traced back to the Northern Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade, a hobby club which launches pico balloons to see how long they can orbit Earth for. This object, flying at 40,000 feet, was described in Internal National Defense, Canadian Armed Forces, or CAF emails as a cylindrical object, top quarter metallic, remainder white, 20-foot wire hanger below with a package of some sort suspended from it. And there's been zero evidence to date indicating that the hobbyist balloon posed any sort of kinetic military threat to North America. However, Prime Minister Trudeau erroneously misidentified the object as having Chinese origins at a pre-scheduled conference in Whitehorse on February 13th, and the evidence was never corrected by Canadian officials. 3 days later, President Biden cautioned tying all 4 objects to the PRC program in a comprehensive brief. So in Canada, the information vacuum left by poor strategic communications from national defense was filled by commentators who relied on speculation, which only contributed to the politically charged social media discourse filled with misinformation. There were no public statements from the Minister of National Defense, National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, or Commander of the Air Force. The only statement was a short press release from the Prime Minister's office between he and the President, which thanked NORAD and that the Canadian Armed Forces will recover and analyze the wreckage. And I'd suggest that it's still not clear 2 years later to Canadians that the latter 3 objects, including the one in the Yukon, were not connected and likely hobbyist balloons, which were only detected after NORAD reoriented its radar systems. So these incidents represent the binational command's integrated cross-border nature. It worked exactly as it was supposed to, as outlined in the 1958 and 2006 agreements, with combined command and control and seamless movement of air assets and personnel across our shared border. And regardless of national borders, Canada and the US treat North American airspace as indivisible and work in a binational manner. The US F-22 Raptor downed the object over the Yukon near Dawson City, as it was the first aircraft available to respond, and it was not because CF-18s did not have the capabilities, as was suggested on X. And in Canada, officials corrected that NORAD worked as it never corrected, that NORAD worked as it should with respect to the Yukon balloon. And what is more, messages and comments critical of the response from political elite largely amount to domestic politicking. We shouldn't let partisanship interfere with or sow discord when the geopolitical situation is so tense. So at the local level, and I know I'm running out of time, I'm trying to speed through this, a cooperative approach in recovering the balloon of the Yukon was not initially practiced by National Defence. The one Canadian Rangers Patrol Group company in Dawson City did not receive advanced communications from headquarters in Yellowknife or from D&D CAF about an increased presence of outsiders in their community. Instead, community members noticed operators because of the closed airspace ordered by NAV Canada in the information environment, like on Facebook, or when Tinder lit up like a Christmas tree when special operators showed up on the ground, and when outsiders started renting all the vehicles in the community. Few events happen in the North without it being shared on open source platforms and incorporating the knowledge of ranger companies. And that's why this incident shows the value of enhanced all-domain situational awareness for decision makers, requiring more innovative data sensors and collection systems. The ranger companies represent a tremendous wealth of Indigenous and non-Indigenous knowledge and know-how, and that needs to be a consideration. And former NORAD Commander Van Herk, who was chief during the incident, used it as proof North America and Canada in particular need to move at greater speed of relevancy to update our early warning systems. And this crisis showed that the Canadian North should not be thought of with preconceived notions of borders and people. The Western Arctic and North Pacific, and the Eastern Arctic and North Atlantic cannot be viewed of as the same. Territorial borders do not dictate cultural differences, but are geographic and political. And as Senator Duncan said last night at the Puminar, Yukoners and Alaskans share histories that transcend borders and sign formal MOUs outside their federal governments on governance and defense and security issues in a geographic area Governor Dunleavy and my colleague from the Ted Stevens Center would probably agree is the most strategic place on Earth. And this geostrategic environment today is influenced by shaping trends of climate change, autocratic regimes, and disruptive technologies, and harkens back to an era I'm thinking of the early 1950s. But what is new is the development of hybrid tactics by state actors, which means defense and security, and the civilian-military nexus is increasingly blurred. So to help combat this, policymakers need to value the intricate knowledge Indigenous peoples in the North have of their environment and their communities. Ranger companies can guide and enable whole-of-government approaches to issues management, buffeted by elders and experienced knowledge keepers who have a keen sense of awareness of comings and goings in their community. One last point, this contributes directly to Canadian security and enhances sovereignty in the Arctic through resilient communities. The value of Indigenous and non-Indigenous knowledge when responding to complex situational awareness challenges across the spectrum of defense and security needs to be valued. So thank you.
I should just say, and we are John Urban, but that the so our question is, so how do you teach that? And Ted Stevens Center, this is why we're visiting you and bringing the banner to you, and we'll work through these ideas.
Yep, thank you very much. As I said, we will try to do questions at the end of the session, so for the sake of moving on here a bit, I think we will do exactly that. So then I'm very happy to introduce or ask Julie Aslaksen to come up and present to us, and she is a researcher at Statistics Norway, so not so far from home. And she is a project leader of Econor, the economy of the North. They published a report and will do more, and her co-author was and is Bridget Larocque at the Arctic Athabascan Council and Sustainable Development Working Group of the Arctic Council. So please, Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Urban, for that introduction. I will present the Econor reports to you. We previously published 4 Econor reports, as you can see here, and the 5th one, it's still wrapped up, but it will be unwrapped on May 12th at the completion of the Norwegian chairship of the Arctic Council. I am one of the editors of Econor. The 2 other editors, the one is Solveig Glomstrø of Cicero International Climate Center in Oslo, and the other is Gérard Dehem, Laval University in Quebec, Canada. And today I should have been joined with my colleague Bridget Larocque, as Urban said, but unfortunately she could not travel, but she's with us in spirit here. So before I talk about the report, there much gratitude to be expressed. We're working on the Econor reports for 20 years, mainly with funding from the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Econor is also funded by Nordic Council of Ministers and the Canadian Department of Crown, Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. As I said, the 5th report will be launched on May 12th. And we have extensive cooperation with Canada, the Wealth of the Arctic Group of Experts project, also funded by the Science Council and Ministry in Canada. And this is a large international circumpolar project. We present the economy for all the Arctic regions, circumpolar. And to do this, we have what we call the Econor network of statisticians, researchers, other experts, indigenous knowledge holders across the Arctic. And without this cooperation in the Econor network, we could not have been able to produce these large reports. And the Econor reports are for the Arctic Council, the Sustainable Development Working Group. And it's very important that it's a consensus report approved by the Arctic Council. And for the previous Econor report, work is led by Norway and co-led by Canada and the United States. And there are the permanent participants in the Arctic Council. And previously, Econor was co-led by the Sami Council. This time, it's still co-led by the Sami Council, also by the Gwich'in Council International, and we are waiting for more co-leads to support our work. And the aim of this report, you know, it used to be very thin. It's getting bigger every time because there is so much material to cover. But our ambition is to make a useful report that gives an overview. You know, the theme today is the Arctic communities, and we want to give the broader context, the overview. What are the big trends from the economy influencing the communities of the Arctic? So we give this overview at a glance of the Arctic regions and the socio-economic developments, and we describe the main trends, the climate change, and also the global economic development with the ever-increasing demand for all the natural resources of the Arctic. This is the context for the economy of the North. And we emphasize the importance of the natural resources, land, fisheries, petroleum, minerals, how the natural resources give opportunities for economic development, and also threatens the nature-based livelihoods of the indigenous peoples, the communities, the other Arctic residents. So here is an overview of the chapters of the Econor. First, we have the thematic chapters of the economic development, the socio-economic development. And then we have the thematic chapters. We start by looking more into the economic developments, the petroleum, climate, and then we have a new chapter on the gender perspectives in the Arctic economies, and then we have 2 chapters on the indigenous economies. First, where we cooperate with the permanent participants of the Arctic Council and describe the relation to the land in the indigenous people's own voice, and then another chapter where we look at more what do we have of available statistics and studies on the economy of the indigenous peoples. Then we have chapters on tourism, permafrost degradation, and a new chapter on the Sustainable Development Goals. So we, as I said, we update, in every report we update 3 years again. So now we look at from 2019 to 2022. Well, this doesn't sound very updated, but the first thing you discover when working with regional economy is that the National Statistical Office, they are always delayed in the regional statistics. First come the national statistics, and then the year or 2 after the regional statistics. But we continue, we carry on, so we always update, but with some delay. And I already mentioned the new chapters, and we are fortunate that we are trying to expand this work to the future and to have a new report in 5 years. About the indigenous people's involvement, as I already mentioned, what is really key to understand is how to describe the relation to the land. When we discuss all the difficult trade-offs about resource extraction in the Arctic, the foundation is to understand the relation to the land. That the Arctic, it's not a lot of empty space in the Arctic. The Arctic is the home to the people who live there. And at this time, it's important to remember Bob Correll, who had a lifelong mission in research and policy analysis for the Arctic. He left us 2 weeks ago, and he supported our Arctic climate impact assessment back in 2005. And I have this short quote here. Bob says that the future research on climate change, it should attempt to explore the research priorities highlighted by the communities themselves. So it sort of brings us in the mind frame from the geopolitical trends to the communities. Also, as the previous speaker talked about, this is really the challenge in this work, how to make a continuum of this, the large difference from the global trends to the communities themselves. This is really the challenge in our work, and this is where we try to contribute to give the economic background. Finally, an advertiser for Thursday. On Thursday, we will have a side event about the Sustainable Development Goals in the Arctic. We have a special new chapter in this new economic report about where we discuss sort of the relevance, the Arctic relevance of the Sustainable Development Goals. They are suited to the global scene, but what are all the Arctic special features? What are the Arctic challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals, and also what are the opportunities? Because as we know, why do we do all this work on the economy? Because measurement is so important to have an informed picture for a policy. So, that was the advertiser for Thursday. So now I look forward to May 12th when the report comes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. I think for practical reasons we stick to this idea of having the questions at the end. So with that, it's my pleasure to invite one also of the Members of the Scientific Committee of Banner, Diane Hertzberg, who is Director of the Institute of Social and Economic Research at the University of Alaska, Anchorage, and also Vice President Academic for the University of the Arctic. So please.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So I'm gonna, I'm not giving so much of a talk about research as talking about processes, how applied researchers can collaborate with our Indigenous communities and organizations to do things differently in order to solve some of the vexing problems that we are collectively facing. And so I will start from, I'm a settler on Indigenous lands in Alaska. I live on the traditional and unceded lands of the Dene in the lands that are part of the native village of Eklutna. And so thank them for welcoming me onto those lands and for their stewardship for thousands of years of beautiful place. And so what I'm going to talk about a little bit is we were approached by former Congresswoman Mary Peltola to talk about the issue of outmigration. And that's a conversation I'm hearing here, we hear across the North about that we are not keeping our population, particularly our young and working age people. And so she approached us wanting to have more research done on this. Well, one of the issues is that, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what the problem is, how we were approaching this because more research isn't needed. We know what the problem is. And so what we wanted to do instead was talk about how do we start addressing the challenges and then talk a little bit about the next steps, which I'm sure you all understand right now. The context is very uncertain for us and how we will address this. But that said, when we look at outmigration in Alaska, this year we seem to have stopped the outward migration overall trend, maybe. And so, but we've had at least 11 consecutive years with more people leaving than arriving. And also, we've also found that it's while our birth rates are staying fairly steady or even going up, what we are losing is young people who are going outside, and what we are not bringing in is working age people with the skills that we need to actually keep our state moving forward economically. And of course, the other issue is that outmigration is a very multifaceted issue. There isn't some simple answer like, oh, we need better jobs or we need, better housing. That's part of it, but it's so much more. And so you don't need to be reading this. You just need to look at the red, right? So that what you're seeing, this is a graphic, and if anybody's interested, there's links to this on our ICER website. But what you're seeing is that red is the amount of people who are moving from a community during that period of time. And what we've got is both an issue of outmigration from our rural and remote communities into our more urban areas. So people moving into Anchorage or to the residential area, the Matsu Valley just north of Anchorage. And then we also have people who are leaving the state as a whole. And we have communities that as the population declines and the number of school-age children decline, then we lose schools as well. And when you lose a school, you often lose the heart of the community because families with children need to leave or they have to send their children away to residential schooling. We still have that too. And so this is our former Congresswoman, and as she noted that there's deep-rooted issues behind this. And again, a conversation you're hearing around this conference. But what we wanted to do was not another conference on what isn't working, what is broken, what is bad, because that tends to be what we do. We tend to focus on problematizing, and we tend to be focusing on sorry, I'm looking at my notes now, but anyway, we wanted to have something that was going to be a way that we were trying to look at a solutions and an assets-based focus rather than looking at a deficit model for what's going on in our communities. And the other point is we wanted the process itself to reflect Native values and Native processes. So that this could be a very inclusive and empowering gathering. And so this was an event that was minimizing people talking at each other, that was making sure that in the processes we were allowing for reflection. So yes, we had to start from a common place. We presented the data on what was happening with outmigration, both ICER academics and our Department of Labor. But then we also, after each presentation, had community conversations in the room, and then we started presentations on what's working in different places. We also wanted everybody involved in the room. Again, it's not just about experts talking. No, this is a community-driven process. Our partners in this were the First Alaskans Institute, the Alaska Federation of Natives, Representative Peltola's office, and then ICER. And one of the things we also started from was a set of agreements that First Alaskans Institute uses in its dialogues. And this is a way of us making sure that everybody is starting from a common way of interacting with each other, that all voices are going to be heard, that everybody is valued, and also reminding people that it's not about credentials, that everybody brings expertise, and everybody deserves to be heard in this conversation. And so again, we had this series of presentations that included federal agencies like the U.S. Arctic Energy Office, and then also Spruce Root is a community-based economic development group. College Gate Elementary has got our Yupik Immersion Program. SEGA is Sustainable Energy Galena, Alaska, which is a partnership between the tribe, the school district, and the community, or the city, around using the development of renewable energy to spur other opportunities in the community. So it was a broad array of conversations, because truly, if you look at outmigration, it's health. So Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium was there. We're missing this on here, not enough space on any slide, but we had the housing and urban development, because it is housing, it is healthcare, it is education, it is economic opportunities. It's all of these things, and it's the history of the colonial structure that was imposed on communities, which is also why we didn't want a colonial structure in how you come to solutions. So the second day, everybody was participating in breakout groups, and these breakout groups morphed because we had a group of topics that we thought were ones people would like to talk to, but everybody was empowered to move forward and create their own. And we supported those so the people who were participating could speak and listen, and they didn't have to worry about reporting out and taking notes. We had a combination of undergraduates, graduate students, and staff from our participating agencies. And the write-ups were all done anonymously so people could speak and feel that their voices were heard without having to worry about potentially personal repercussions. And so I know we're short on time, so we actually have a write-up that I'll be getting posted shortly. I'm behind on that part, but all of the presentations are available through ICER's website. The big question is the next steps. The original goal was, since Peltola was able to bring together financial support as well as this coalition of people, we were going to be bringing these conversations out to rural Alaska. Then we had an election. And so right now, we're not quite sure who's going to fund and how we're going to move this forward, but we are looking at the results being used to inform the work we do as researchers, and hopefully in our next steps, we'll be able to move forward with taking these conversations out for community members who couldn't come in. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane, for the third, also very interesting presentation here. And again, please make notes on questions and comments you might have, since we are going to try to have these at the end. So now it's my pleasure to invite to present Dr. Magnus De Witt, who is a research assistant professor at the University of Alaska at Fairbanks. So please.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks, Diana, for the great introduction with the energy picture in your presentation. I want to present today a little bit about the impact of climate change on the long-term energy security, and I want to focus on energy security and how this is linked to climate change, how this links to the global economy, and how this is reflected in small Arctic communities. And this topic arose to me a long time ago when I was a master's student, but at this time it didn't got a lot of attention, but nowadays, I got much more attention on this topic. So first, let's start with a small definition of what energy security is. And energy security, that's the uninterrupted availability of an energy resource for an affordable price, according to the EIA. And here we can see two different parameters: the uninterrupted availability and the affordable price. And another thing I often like to show, it's the three dimensions of energy policy, which is also including the energy security, but as a dimension more of the reliability of the supply and the primary energy resource. Another dimension would be the affordability, the energy price, and the environmental soundness. And we can see, for example, originally I'm from Germany, and in Germany, in the beginning of this millennia, we had a huge push for environmental soundness of energy generation. But the problem is we neglected the other three dimensions, and now we see the problem. We got high electricity prices and a system which didn't grow with the installment of renewables, and we have a lot of problems related to energy security. So this are one problem set. And during my PhD, I started to talk to people in remote Arctic communities, and they mentioned affordability. That is a key issue for them. And here on this slide, we can see why affordability is an issue. So fuel transportation for remote communities, it's very complex. For example, to this community, the fuel has to flown in, which has an environmental risk as well, but also increases the cost. For example, here it's the community of Noatek, where diesel is flown in, and in 2022 we could see a newspaper article where a gallon of fuel reaches $16. And on average we can see fuel prices in remote Arctic communities between $2.50 up to $4.50. And if you use this expensive fuel to generate electricity, you get high energy prices. Here on this graph, we can see energy prices across the Western Arctic. Of course, we can see some countermeasurements like subsidies to artificially lower this high cost. But of course, this is a huge investment, and I believe that it's possible with renewables to lower the generation cost of electricity. Furthermore, if we take a look on energy security, we can see different time horizons of energy security. As I defined in one of my book chapters on energy security, we can find in the Arctic three different time horizons. Short-term energy security, which is more the reactivity, which I will show you on the next slide. Then mid-term energy security, that's very specific to remote Arctic communities, which is related to the fuel delivery cycle in this community, which is more on a annual level. And then we have the long-term energy security, which is related to energy resource planning, how we can use energy resources over decades, which I will highlight later in this presentation. So here I just want to show that on a short term, it's very important to match the demand in the community and the supply in the community. If this demand and supply is getting out of balance, then we either get a too high or too low frequency and voltage. Of course, it's depending where you're located, if you are aiming for 60 or 50 hertz. And energy resource planning, that's really key for communities, because climate change, it has a huge impact. When I was a master student longer ago than I admitted over a decade ago, I was always hearing, okay, I was in Iceland, and I was always hearing, okay, we have climate change, the glaciers in Iceland, they are disappearing in relatively short time. And in Iceland, as you all hopefully know, we have a lot of hydropower. And I was always wondering, okay, if we have hydropower plants, which are projects for decades, for 50 years, even with a lifetime of up to 100 years, how will climate change impact? When I asked this question as a master's student, I didn't get so much feedback on it. But in the recent years, they are much more concerned about how will be the water supply for these hydropower plants over the long run of decades when the glaciers are melting. Of course, we can see the impact of climate change on other energy resources as well. Currently, we are doing a study on maritime energy sources for the North Slope. How will the loss of sea ice, for example, change the wave patterns, and will this open up some new opportunities? But of course, if we integrate renewables, then we can also give more energy security to these communities, because if we have a more diverse portfolio of energy resources, if one resource breaks away, the community still has other resources. And local resources have a huge advantage, because if the diesel fuel is imported, the communities are depending on the global market of fossil fuels. If they are using local resources, they are getting more independent from the global economy, which helps the community to get more independent and more self-sufficient. But of course, these communities in the Arctic, they are very small, so if we add a lot of different resources, we add a lot of complexities to the system. And this is a question, is it possible for these small communities to handle, to operate this grid? And this is a critical point, because the communities, they have to handle the grid. And in these remote communities, workforce development, that's often a missing link. I wanted to give you a short introduction of a project on the maritime energy resources, but I think I have to skip it because I saw that I just got 2 more minutes, so I have to jump to my summary slide. So energy, that's the backbone of the modern Arctic communities, and energy security is important to for local development, to foster local economies. And as Diane has mentioned, this is really important for the communities to make a good living in this community, to keep people in the community. And that's why we have to look how can we help communities to improve the energy situation, because that's the backbone, that's what any kind of business in this community needs. A problem in these communities currently is that the energy grid is not really redundant. So if one part breaks away, it's really hard to replace it because there are no ways around. It is not just in small communities, it's the same even in the rail belt. If we take a look on the grid, the rail belt, it's a grid from Anchorage up to Fairbanks. And it's not really a grid, it's more like someone draw an extension cord from Anchorage up to Fairbanks. It's just one line. If this one line breaks down, there is no way to move electrons between Anchorage and Fairbanks. That's a huge problem for energy security. And of course, diversification, as before, that's a way to help to increase energy security, but of course it also can lower the energy security if it's not manageable for these small communities. And I think with this, I would like to close my short presentation. I hope for your questions later on.
Thank you very much, Magnus, and thank you all speakers. We are fairly on time, as we are. But let's move on. So, next speaker is Eleni Kavata, and she's with the Catholic University of Louvain, researcher. And she also has a background with studying entrepreneurship in northern and indigenous areas here at Tromsø University. So, the floor is yours.
Hi. Well, it's good that these presentations happened before mine. So now we can talk a little bit about who pays the price of having energy security for the European Union, and is it disappropriately put on some people's burdens, on some people's back. So this is a project, it has just started, it's very new, so bear with me. It's navigating art in complexity. We are actually trying to see what happens between the Sami and the EU, and is it really, as it is presented right now, that they have these channels of influence and that they are given room and space to express themselves? Let me be more specific. Oh, this is so weird. I have a strong voice. I think I can move further here because eyesight not as strong as the voice. Okay, this is a project about the impact of the EU policies on Sami communities in the Sami regions of Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Initially, there were some regions in Russia in this project, but we are having difficulty to retrieve the data right now. So for now, they are out of this project. We are going to study two types of international actors, and then we are going to see what happens, what is the interplay between the EU policies and the Sami communities. What is the impact? Of course, there have been numerous studies on this, but now we are entering this new era of the EU trying to be energy resilient, and this brings us to a new era of discussion between the only indigenous people, well, the only indigenous people the EU recognizes on European ground, and the EU. So let's go a bit further behind. In 2021, we have this EU Arctic policy, which was updated with a joint communication, and there was a very strong wording in this document. The EU is actually trying to respond to all the changes happening, and then there's a willingness to get more engaged in the Arctic. There's a change in wording. We will do this, we will do that. I remember when this was actually presented, this document, I was very lucky to be in the room with the presentation. And then I was very, I had this feeling of uneasiness and awkwardness when the Sami representatives that were in the room took the speech and said, oh, we are actually surprised by this, because it is talking about exploitation, about inclusivity, but then we weren't even informed that this is coming out, and it's already talking about minerals, it's talking about activities that will be taking place on indigenous ground. There was, the Sami Council responded, there was concern, and then these concerns, sometimes we tend to treat it like, oh, they are already prejudiced and they are ready to contest everything that is made, and then a few years later, well, we come to this, the EU Critical Raw Materials Act. I don't know how many of you are aware of it. It's very modern now in Brussels. It's like the topic everybody talks about, and it's supposed, well, it's an act for the future of the EU supply chains. It was adopted in March 2024, and what is actually happening is this is an effort of the EU to become independent and to source critical raw materials from its grounds. But these grounds, where are these grounds? Where are these EU critical raw materials? Some heads are already know the answer. Yes, they are mostly on Sami land, or at least on land that the Sami are engaging in the traditional activities, mainly reindeer husbandry. And then it is an act, and you can look it up, that actually enables fast-track procedures in mining activities. And what is very interesting is that right after this act was adopted in March, 1 month or 2 months later, there were very important developments in Sweden. Close to the Kiruna mine, there was a very big reservoir that was discovered, and then fast track helped into making these projects bigger and bigger. Ooh. So, of course, once again, the Sami were a bit, well, they expressed how they felt, and they made this statement. It's very clear, and it was very, very strong. And then they are now using the same wording as the EU had used previously, like it will lead to increased exploitation in Sapmi, where the consequences are already devastating. And are they right? Are they wrong? There has been a little bit of research on this. The EU officials where I've had contacts pointed me towards some videos that have been made on the Kiruna region that were supposed to be proving that it's going quite well. I don't know if they've actually seen the videos, because the videos show that it's not going that well. There is opposition. So there was a Sami Parliament's intervention, and then there was an amendment made in September 2023. Of course, already some permits had been given in between. And then now they added the FPIC, prior and informed consent. It's welcome, it's necessary, but to this point it's insufficient, and I will explain why. The first case study of this research project is the EU Critical Raw Materials Act in this region. So let's see. This is a video. I can send it if somebody needs it. It's exactly what's happening in this region, but I will explain. So there was, I need to move because I'm actually, yeah. Okay, so in January 2023, the state-owned mining company LKAB discovered more than 1 million tons of rare earth minerals in Kiruna. And what you see here is the Kiruna municipality, which has several Sami here. They are Sami communities. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. The Sami, for those who don't know, is a geographical area where reindeer herding is carried out, but it's also a kind of like economic and administrative unit. And this new reservoir is discovered near Gabna. And then this is the wording that has come out. This is coming out from LKAB, and it's what they have, the statement they have made. So they do recognize it's an important migration route for the reindeer. They do recognize that there is a dialogue, but other than that, if you read this statement, you will see that it's very using like a sort of colonialism language. However, we have not decided on the mining process yet. We are not sure what it's like. It's very, very clear that this is happening, whatever it takes, because now, of course, the support from the EU is very strong on these projects. And then, yes, we will discuss compensation activities. Oh, no, really? Yes, okay, then very fast. It's a story that most of we already know. And then, of course, this is the perspective of the Sami so far. They are already left with a very small strip of land, few kilometers wide, and then this is going to cause them more problems. So I could stop here, and then already it would be an issue in itself. But what this project is trying to do is we don't come here to stand completely against these initiatives, but it is the reality that makes it so. This is the reality. So in justice of this project, we are going to look into other case studies as well to see if the EU has managed to do better in some other policies, and we're going to be monitoring this EU Critical Raw Materials Act and see where it goes from now. And yes, there are some propositions that have been already coming out from the Sami communities for this project. And then this is something that I've heard throughout this conference from everyone, that more data is needed, more resources are needed. I need to tell you that in order to study the perception of the Sami on these EU policies, I was reverted to a site of EU surveys that were made to assess how people are perceiving EU policies. And then I asked, okay, Sami, especially on the Sami, are there any data that are in a different category? And I was told, no, they are not so far. But I have to say, this is a very new project, so let's meet here maybe in a year and see how it's going. Thank you. 3 seconds, my God.
Well, maybe we have a little bit of technical issues with the timekeeping, but I don't think so. So I'm very grateful for the speakers who are doing their best here in our high tempo session. And again, make little notes if you can about questions you would like to ask later. So we move on to Laura Jonka Aikio from not so far away, Rovaniemi, Professor of Northern Politics and Government at the University of Lapland. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I had no idea when it's my turn, so nice to be surprised this now. Thank you so much for the chance to talk here. I actually realized that I forgot to include in my slides a mention of Interreg Aurora project called Mahtut, which is actually paying my presence in this pretty expensive conference. So it's a project led by Professor Sanna Valkonen at the University of Lapland, and it actually looks at Sami circular economy practices, basically trying to lift up and also revitalize Sami ways of managing resiliently in this environment without electricity, for instance. So making visible forms of food conservation, food production, kind of food security of the Sami, and talking about it in the context of well, basically the green transition and recycling and circular economy. But basically, since we started the project, new issues become challenges for Sami livelihoods, and therefore my contemporary research, which actually has to do with military land use, expansion of military land use, has not fallen too far from the project. So here I will be talking about that mainly. And I also have to say that I'm currently working with a very tight schedule to prepare a report on this for the Truth and Reconciliation Committee Commission in Finland for the Sami. So basically they have asked me to write a report on the impact of military land use and militarization on Sami livelihoods, culture, rights, etc. So this is an issue that actually is acknowledged as a new and pretty burning issue in this area of, or in this region. I will talk without slides. It's better when there's not so much time. So basically the title of my talk is very long, Decolonizing Arctic Geopolitics, Subaltern Security Dilemmas and the Politics of Rural Land Use in Times of the Green Transition and Militarization. So basically in this paper, which hopefully will be published as a discussion piece in the Nordic Review of International Studies over this year, because there is actually going to be a special issue on Arctic politics. So basically the starting point obviously is that, as we all know, there is growing huge geopolitical economic interest in Sami lands in this high north, or in the Sapmi that we are also currently sitting in. And well, this is based on climate change, on the exposure of natural resources, on the global rush for whatever remains to be used. And as a result of this, Sapmi, or the Sami region, is becoming increasingly considered as vital, not only for national interest, but also for the EU interest and for the West at large, whether in terms of providing critical minerals, whether in terms of providing energy for the green transition, and now more recently also as a space, an area which needs to be secure, but it is also vital for national and EU and NATO security interests in the Arctic region. And so in this context, land use in this region is being increasingly dictated or guided by interests that are defined far away from this region from perspective of others. And in this context, also the kind of terra nullius, or the empty land rhetoric, and the idea that there's space for everything in this region is becoming increasingly prominent, not only among people who don't care, but in actual state policies and in ways decision making is made, in the ways in which land use policies are developed, etc. And one of the issues that the Sami have had to deal with is the sharp increase in energy development relating to green transition, and obviously as a side effect also mining that is needed to sustain this energy transition. And when this form of land use, which, and I think there is a space for a very interesting conversation between Canada and Sápmi, because I understand in Canada the discourse around renewable energies is very different. But in Sápmi, it's really become a huge threat for Sami traditional livelihoods, and again, of course, especially reindeer herding, which depends on access to large pasture lands, which are unfragmented, uninterrupted by all sorts of infrastructure. So basically, when this kind of new form of land use entered the town, it was pretty difficult for Sami to articulate their rights and articulate their resistance against this form of land use, because it was justified in the name of the general good in terms of saving the planet from the impending climate catastrophe. And I think it was in response to this problem of how do you articulate your own concerns, your own rights, your own needs in face, oh Jesus, 2 minutes, okay. So basically, how do you articulate such needs when it's justified based on such huge planetary needs? And the concept of green colonialism, which actually not maybe emerged completely, but it was really mobilized by Aili Keskitalo, who was acting as the president of Sami Parliament. I think that was a huge breakthrough for articulating this kind of subaltern concerns, which emerge in the context of trying to save the planet, but having to sacrifice your indigenous culture, bearing a disproportionate burden of those measures. Now in the present context, for example, discourses about sustainable just transition, green colonialism is starting to emerge as an issue. There is now understanding of the problem-shifting problematic in the context of the energy transition. However, currently the new play in the town is really expanding military land use. We have NATO membership of Finland and Sweden. We have defense cooperation agreements with the US. We have massive expansion of military land use in form of military exercises, military bases, etc., but also in terms of infrastructure development, which is being done now in response to military needs rather than community needs, rather than any other needs. And it's also justified with the kind of fast track, so without democratic discussion. And of course, it's justified in reference to security, to national security, which is certainly an issue that most Sami would not contest. So what I argue is that we are facing a similar situation, and as with the green transition, there's a need for new concepts. There's a need for us researchers to actually focus on those problems that this new land use is actually causing for local communities, for indigenous communities, and try to articulate in a way that does not abolish or cover up the complexity of the situation, but which acknowledges those concerns and concerns as legitimate. So therefore, in that article that I hope will be published, I'm trying to develop a concept of subaltern security dilemmas to kind of help us to deal with and to talk about and to fix attention on the new threats and challenges to security that militarization and measures to improve national security may be producing for Sami communities and also other local communities who are relying on traditional land use that needs access to large areas and does not thrive under military exercises. Okay, I finish here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for this and also keeping track of yourself without any slides and even that hard work of doing that. So we are now going to our final speaker in this part 1 of session 7, to be precise. And my word goes down to Ellie Perry, who is a research analyst at the Ted Stevens Center for Arctic Security Studies. So please.
Didn't know we were going to wrap it up today, so I'll try to keep it quick. I want to add, I'm here also with my colleague who is the lead curriculum developer at the TSC, Dr. Christine Duprow. So we are presenting today on a project that we've been working on. It's still ongoing, and I can't see very well. And it's focused on the nexus between human-centered design, health, human security, and challenges in the Arctic. And what I guess our title is a little too long to fit it on there, but it is focused on community-level health security and at the nexus with increasing maritime shipping in the Arctic. So, let's see. And a little bit of context on the lens that we've been using for that project. We're focused on health as a pillar of human security. And when I talk about human security, we are largely pulling from the definition used by the United Nations, which, if you can see on the right-hand side there, we have the 6 pillars as described by the UN. I've highlighted health security because that's the focus of our project. But rather than honing in on health security itself, as most of us know, working in the sphere, particularly at community level, all of those pillars are extremely interconnected. So that's the background that we're going into this. In addition, one of the critical components of human security that we really appreciate is those 5 principles, which are it's people-centered, comprehensive, context-specific, which we've all talked about a lot today, prevention-oriented, and focused on protection and empowerment. And so with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague.
So the next slide you should see here. Next slide. Time.
Sorry, that's me.
That's you, sorry. You'll look here and see that the maritime shipping in the Arctic, you'll see the distance sailed, and then the other graph you'll see the increase. We've got 111% from up to 2023, and then the next graph over here talks about unique ships, and I just want to highlight that that means that those ships were only counted one time while they were in the Arctic, so if they transitioned back and forth, that was still only one count. But you'll see that there's been a huge increase in that shipping in the area, and its impact is one of the things that we're looking at. And this map right here might be hard to see from the back. We'll make sure these slides are available up on our website to look a little closer. But what you'll see here is you've got, the first one is your Arctic sea transport routes and ports. That's pretty familiar to most folks that have looked in this Arctic sphere. And then you've got the type of settlements by population is the middle one. And then finally you have the road infrastructure and the Arctic settlements in that area. Sorry, speak louder, sorry. Apologies. I don't want to fall off the podium up here, so yeah, that's the other part. That would be pretty embarrassing. I'll speak louder. So anyway, you've had time to look at that while we muss up here. Next.
Try not to push you off the stage too. So honing that all in together, looking at those maps, pulling in the lens of human security, I really love this image. I'm sure some of the panelists are familiar with this, but others in the audience, if you're not, this is a beautiful image put together by the Inuit Circumpolar Council in Alaska. This is pulled directly from their food security framework, but I find that it's just very applicable to life in general and health in general when you're looking at the Arctic. And in particular, I want to highlight, we're looking at the maritime domain, so pulling in our focus on increased shipping. Just looking at everything as a puzzle, everything's interconnected, and you really can't pull out one element from the other. And so with that, I'll go into what our project is focused on. Some people were part of this yesterday. It's called the Arctic Maritime Health Security Risk Index Project, a long kind of mouthy name, but the objective of this project is to identify community-level indicators of health security as it relates to increased shipping. But the nuance that we're using in this project is a novel approach called human-centered design, which is Christine's specialty. It's an approach that's not traditionally used in this sphere, and so where we've been applying it is particularly looking at that human security lens, and particularly trying to pull out those community-level indicators, so those indicators that are relevant to communities and not just at a national scale. And so the long-term goal, as the title suggests, is to create an index, and we're not there yet. Yeah, so I'll get to the next part, which is human-centered design.
And just the last slide that you saw up there with the pretty picture, that was not here. That was actually the first pilot that we did in Edinburgh at Arctic Science Week in 2024, February, March. Some of you may have been there for that too, yeah. Now I'm lost. Okay, here we go. Human-centered design, if you've never heard of it before, you see lots of sticky notes, lots of interactivity, you get to talk to each other. But the reason that we chose that, I'll move to the center, sorry. I'm almost done, you don't have to remind me anymore. One of the reasons that we chose that is we really wanted to make sure that we're getting a community input from where people sit. It's really easy to stand back and gather data, but when you're not hearing from the people that live in that community and the positions that they are in, it makes it difficult to make those indexes when you really are standing backwards and not dealing with the people that are in that community. And so we've tried really hard to bring in a variety of people from defense, from community, from industry, all across the board to try to get an idea of using that input from those people specifically. And would also mention that human-centered design is used across many sectors, industry, Airbnb, Oral-B. So we tried to take a look at a way to match across all those puzzle pieces in order to get a good index.
So going into the results of our pilot test that we conducted in, I think someone yelled it out there, I think it was April, of last year. There we go. What you see up here is a bar graph representing the themes of the indicators that we pulled out. And so I'll highlight some of these colors. What I've done is a thematic analysis of the indicators pulled out from our Arctic Science Summit Week pilot test, which is in the blue. And then, sorry, I'm looking at a black and white image up here. In the green, orange, and gray, that's where we're looking at the conventional measurements of health security. And by conventional, I say those that are used most commonly throughout the world. The JEE is the Joint External Evaluation Tool. The GHSI is the Global Health Security Index. And the SPAR is the State Party Annual Reporting System. And so what those are is they're really fantastic tools that are used globally, but they are on a national scale. So they're not very applicable to the community level. And so what we did was do a thematic analysis looking at what we found in our pilot test workshop in April with those themes that are found in conventional tools. And so I want to highlight some of the major differences that you can see are looking at the blue, which was our pilot test. And so while there's quite a bit of overlap between the four different frameworks, you have cybersecurity, environmental, food security, local observations, climate, and governance were all themes that were pulled out looking at a community level that you're just not really seeing on a national scale. So pretty stark differences that we're hoping to continue to pull out as we continue this project, hopefully with another iteration at some point in the spring. And so with that, I know I don't have very much time, but I think I have a little bit. Yeah. Cool. We conducted a workshop yesterday, also kind of continuing on the pilot test, but with some different methods. And so I haven't done the thematic analysis on that, but I'll highlight some of the outcomes that we found yesterday. We're particularly highlighting indicators focused particularly on critical infrastructure like food security, air quality, pollution control, landfills, all really focused on quality of life. But the part that was really stark that I think we found with using the methods, the human-centered design methods, is we had our participants really kind of playing some mind games with themselves. So for example, some of the other indicators that were pulled out were drug trafficking, human trafficking. But when we had them prioritize them on a list of what is most important at a community level scale, those are pulled to the end. So just a really interesting method to use. We're looking forward to seeing more outcomes where it goes, and hopefully to be able to create a really valuable index for the Arctic region. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellie and Christine. You had to introduce yourselves there, but we have some different information sheets here that we are looking at. So yeah, well, we have some 10 minutes for questions and comments from the audience before we will break this part one of this session 7 that is actually then 3 parts. So we will reconvene with this another round of presentations today after the break. But for now, questions, comments, and we will have microphones available. Oh, you can try that since we do have time. It was very hard for us to, to look at the number of speakers and understand how long will it take to make the panelists come forward. So this is why we are. But let's see. I can kick off with a question or a comment. Yeah, please. I can start, it's a comment mostly probably to Diane's presentation about how do you deal with the new ideas about in and out movement in the remote areas, so to say. Having been working for 16 years in Kirkenes, I heard a lot of these discussions, and there are a lot of, critique and what are the problems, and you get kind of stuck on that. So I've been reading other kinds of research. What about the category of people who have moved out of the region and to try to get them back, or that they see the combination, because they might have done 2 networks now. They might have got the business ideas, they have entrepreneurial knowledge that they didn't have as youngsters. You have entrepreneurial classes with very young people in Kirkenes, for example, and you kind of doubt that this is very productive. But there are some excellent examples where people move back, know the region, and combine this. Have you looked at instances of that, or what is your opinion on that?
So we haven't looked at it through this project, and the data we're using from Department of Labor, it's a good question for us to see if we can see that trend. I know anecdotally that there are, in particular for our Indigenous communities, young people who leave don't necessarily leave voluntarily. They leave because there's no housing, no jobs, or if to get an advanced education, there isn't a way to facilitate that. And we see that young people will move back either partway, in a sense. They'll go outside to university and they'll come back to Anchorage, and they will self-identify as still working for their communities if they're working for a not-for-profit, for the state, for an Indigenous corporation in Anchorage. And we see a lot of people who go home for subsistence activities, for important milestones in the community, so a lot of back and forth. And we also see there's a lot of back and forth migration. Again, sometimes intentional, sometimes involuntary. And in particular, probably the most disruptive form of that we see is for children who are moved from different family members because of, again, living conditions, because there's not enough space in the homes in a rural community. So they come and they live with aunties and uncles in the urban areas, but there's so many challenges when children are moved into particularly Anchorage, which is a large city compared to, we have schools in Anchorage that have many more people than villages have as a whole population. So there's a lot more cycling of than I think is necessarily understood, but it's definitely a complexity of that housing. In some cases, it's healthcare, because we have individual health providers in villages who are paraprofessionals, but again, mental health services almost completely absent in our rural communities. So there's this whole constellation, but part of it is looking at, when we talked about Sega, when you have a place that is very much looking long-term at renewable energy that is developed in such a way that it creates local employment, that it creates local opportunities for expanding economic opportunities, that is driven by the community and the values of the community, that becomes a much different and holistic perspective versus traditional economic development models from a very Western and colonial mindset.
Thank you. Laura, you had perhaps a question or? Okay, let's.
Sure, happy to.
I should just remember to say one thing from the technical side. Also, the part 2 of this session will not take place in this room. So you will have, after the break, it will be in Arbetskontoret 2, I think. So, but please go on.
Yes, hi, thank you so much for all the presentations. It's really nice to see the diversity of topics here. My question is to the folks from the Ted Stevens Center. So thank you very much. I know 8 minutes is not a lot of time, but I was curious, with your community indicators and these workshops that you're hosting, are there members from the communities present at these workshops? And then also with this index that you're creating, I'm curious how you see it being applied and for what purpose?
To answer your first question about community members, there have been some. Our ideal goal is to host workshops in local communities. So that's why the first one in Scotland was a pilot test to just essentially see how the methods work. And yesterday, similarly, we had representation from different countries, but not necessarily rural communities. So the goal is to eventually be doing those in communities as much as we can. And I'm so sorry, I forgot your second question. Thank you. So the goal with the index is to have it be used. We've got different stakeholders in mind. Of course, being from the Ted Stevens Center, we're hoping that at some point different federal agencies can use it, but ideally also community members can use it and communities themselves to look at where they are on a scale of health security and then being able to plot those with other critical health security infrastructure. So long-term goals may be lofty, but that's the hope.
And I would add, the further of that is also looking at the impact on security overall, from women, peace, and security to huge, big pan-Arctic security and how much of an impact that has, and following that trail to see if we can help establish some more of that as well.
Thank you. Well, we shouldn't perhaps drag into the pause here, but if there is a quick comment or snappy question or answer. But if not, it's my pleasure to say everyone big thanks to the audience, big thanks to the speakers, and for keeping the time and reacting to all the information here on 3 screens. Thank you.